Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's podcast from EdLogics on workforce well-being. I'm so pleased to be joined today by Andrew Bartlow, who talks about being a people leader accelerator. I'm really interested to hear how he does that, what that means, and a little bit more about his background. So, Andrew, we've been chatting for a while about your background, but welcome. And why don't you tell everybody a little bit about your background and kind of your career path?
Sure. Yeah, thanks a lot and really appreciate you hosting me. I think I mentioned earlier, I am a lifelong or at least career long HR guy. I've been working inside giant enterprise organizations and human resources functions like GE and Pepsi and Wells Fargo and mid cap organizations, one of which I was the chief people officer as they went public and continued to grow. And then a handful of startups. So all in, I've been head of the function 4, 5, 6 times, depending how you count M&A work. And maybe 5 years ago, I pulled my golden parachute with the latest merger as headquarters moved and all the equity vested, and I wrote my bucket list book
Yeah.
and started consulting and advising and, doing more passion project work like People Leader Accelerator. Just really fortunate, but continue to be, closely connected to the HR community. And now I'm trying to give back.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And we're going to talk about your book in a second, but let's back up a half second. Did you always want to be an HR guy? How'd you land there?
Yeah, I guess I'm one of the few people that went to school for it. My undergrad was industrial organizational psychology. I went straight through to grad school at arguably the top program in the world, the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana. Got pulled into the function due to a labor strike between Caterpillar, which was headquartered in my hometown of East Peoria, Illinois, and the United Auto Workers. 3 years with, my friends' parents on the picket line, and that being the biggest news that the Peoria Journal-Star would cover for 3 years in a row. So, I wanted to be where the action was. I wanted to be at the center of work that impacted communities and organizations and the people that worked there. And at one point, I thought that was labor relations. I come to find out that's actually human resources and they're closely connected. So I've done a lot of labor work in my background, but boy, it transitioned strongly more into tech and the knowledge worker economy over the past 15, 20 years.
Yeah, so interesting. So, this idea of scaling for success and some of the people leader accelerator, what are some of the things? Are you talking to C suite folks? You talking to mid managers? Is it, so much talk about culture overall and leaders driving culture, but it's got to be bottom up. So, where do you start?
Yeah, there's a lot. Boy, there's a lot of common knowledge and progressive practices that I don't think are often optimal or even close to being effective. Being based out here in the San Francisco Bay Area during the, extended bull run and the, tech market run, I've seen the people business get a lot of attention. I've seen the war for talent drive programs and policies and escalating compensation offers. But I've found that it seems in a lot of ways to be disconnected from organizational realities. It's more of everything without being connected to the purpose. And so when I wrote the book, it was my attempt to try to elevate the function of human resources and support the practitioners that do that work. And could this speak to founders? Could this speak to senior business leaders in other functions and departments? Sure. But really, this is my attempt to be helpful to the HR professionals that are out there in the growth world, which is largely in this space, private equity and venture backed tech companies.
I've worked with benefits and human resource leaders, human capital leaders now, we call them, I guess, in some cases. And a lot of my focus, of course, has been on the kind of health related issues that those leaders deal with and how that trickles through to being a successful organization, meeting your business performance goals. But I was interested in particular when you mentioned purpose and helping companies kind of stay grounded, I guess you might call it, through getting back to what's our purpose. So Purpose is another hot topic that we could talk about quite a bit and means a lot of different things. When you talk purpose, talk more about that. What do you mean by purpose? How do you help people get aligned with that?
Yeah, that's actually some of the consulting and advising work that I'll do in an ad hoc project here and there, or I have an operating partner role where I'll engage with the 25 or 30 companies in a PE firm's portfolio on things like this. Largely it's identifying as an organization who you want to be, what you want to do. What's your vision 5 years out? Why do you exist? And if you can identify those things, at least roughly, in somewhat of a concrete way, everything else can cascade, can waterfall down from that. Do you want to be the biggest, the most profitable, the most life changing, whatever organization? Okay, well, what do you need to do to get there?
Aren't most companies, I mean, isn't that pretty basic? Like, do not
It's,
many companies know their purpose and vision?
isn't it shocking?
Yeah.
So much of that is just corporate speak. It's just
Yes.
throwaway stuff to put on a mouse
Very
pad.
cliche. Exactly.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean anything. So, like, really being thoughtful about who are we? What are we trying to accomplish? Like the development program you so kindly mentioned, the People
Yeah.
Leader Accelerator. I do that. It'll never be a billion-dollar business. It may never be $1 million business. But I set out to create the most useful development program for HR strategic HR leaders. How do you go from being a director to a VP to a chief people officer? And I don't think the schools are teaching that. And I don't think that programs that are available another way teach that. So that is my guiding
Mhm.
principle. That is my purpose. I want to elevate the people doing HR work. And I think that a lot of organizations, for profit, not for profit, public, private, you name it, have not really thought through that question. And it doesn't need to be a big, complicated 18-month exercise with focus groups. That's where a lot of people get it wrong. So much of my work is encouraging people to go back to the basics, be brilliant at those
Mhm.
basics. Like,
Mhm.
don't just throw fancy marketing slogans on the wall. Be thoughtful about what are you trying to accomplish? Where do you want to be? What's going to take to get there? And all of a sudden, your goals and your priorities, the types of people that you hire, and your org design, and your performance management strategies, and the benefits that you offer start to make a lot of sense. You can start to make some very clean and clear choices when you know where you're trying to go.
There's so much of the, I guess, one old school was mission, vision, values kind of
Sure.
work, getting clear about that. So revisiting that and then really living those principles, is that kind of part of the advice, I guess?
Yeah. I do some MVV, mission, vision, values, slash purpose
Yeah.
work. And it can be as simple as what does our organization do? And then ask yourself, peel back the onion a few times. Well, what's the benefit of that? Well, what's the benefit of that?
Right.
And you're elevating each time you ask that benefit question. And you can find something that is probably quite compelling, probably something that is higher order, larger impact than any single thing an individual could do themselves. That then gives you something to aim for at an
Mhm.
organization. And so then values and mission will flow from that longer term vision. Yeah, I feel like maybe it's consultants like me or consultants that are not like me that overcomplicate this. Like, this does not need to be some massive McKinsey 24-month project. That's for the companies with deep pockets and time to waste. Most of us are trying to get something done. And
Right.
so let's just get clear on what it is that we're trying to get done and get on with it.
It reminds me, kind of my career has been in health and well-being. And part of the trick, there are your kind of generic best practices and kind of core elements, the resources you might want. But every company is different. So when I
Right.
walk into a client, I would try to understand what their culture was, i.e., their mission, vision, values. And I remember one I walked into was a manufacturing company, and we started asking those onion questions that you're talking about. And at the end of the day, they started saying, well, we're all about quality. We create quality tools, we create quality, quality, quality. And so we got into this place of, well, what about quality of life? What about quality of your personal health, your mental health, the
Love it.
quality of your interactions? So quality became our kind of guiding principle,
Yep.
which I found fit very well with their culture, right? So if you speak the culture and the value, then that kind of all flowed. It was a very good theme for us in that case.
I love the alignment there and the clarity around that strong central drive. Chances are that organization, even though you got there and identified that quality was the core of it, chances are it didn't show up as prominently in their own values, in their own culture statement. And that's where, again, we get too complicated. We have, too many things that we think sound good. And, clarity and focus will help us accelerate in so many ways.
Well, you need the language and the protocols in a given culture. So it kind of gets back to that. What's your corporate culture? How do you really live those? Are you, really a servant leader, or are you just kind of saying you are? And kind of how do your hiring practices? It all, I'm sure, flows through to specific practices. What do you find are some of the trip falls for people when they, are trying to do this? So there are some key big hurdles that people are trying to address other than kind of the ones you've mentioned already about just sticking with the basic?
Yeah. I think, again, getting too complicated is a common pitfall. You might have your 7 values with
Yeah.
lengthy statements around them and, complexity. I also find a lot of organizations with good intentions try to crowdsource their culture, try to crowdsource their values. You'll ask an organization with hundreds or even thousands of employees, well, who are we and who do we want to be? And right or wrong, good or bad, asking your frontline workers who we are as an organization is not as accurate or as effective as asking those with real power, the decision makers. Who are we? How do we make decisions? On what basis do people get hired, fired, promoted, rewarded, recognized, etc.? That's culture. Culture is how decisions get made. And you don't ask your front line about that. You depend on your leaders to provide that direction. And then maybe you course correct based on input elsewhere or provide more clarity from your leadership team and middle management, down to your front line. I see lots of well-intended, highly collaborative senior leaders delegating and trying to empower their workforce to tell them what they want. What most workforces want is clear direction.
Yeah.
And they can decide whether they want to be part of that or not. I'm maybe going down too far of a rabbit hole on this, but I find that to be somewhat counterintuitive, where you want to be collaborative, you want to engage people,
Mhm.
but ultimately you're ineffectual if you are crowdsourcing the direction that leaders should be providing to their own organization.
Yeah, I love that. And speaking of simple, I once asked a company about culture, and they basically just said, you probably heard this one, it's how we get stuff done around here.
Yep.
That's culture. How do we do stuff? So let me pivot a little bit here. We talked earlier, you and I did a little bit about the relationship between individual health and well being and being able to be a leader. I didn't mention it here. I'm chief health officer also of this company, EdLogics, which really promotes health literacy. And my career has been around health. And I found that this is a huge gap that we know only 1 in 10 people actually are comfortable navigating the healthcare system and understand information that they get from doctors in health areas. And yet we continue in the system to what I call give a man a fish, not teach a man to fish. So I've talked about this thing called health literacy 2.0, where we use behavioral science and gamification, data and personalization and interactive multimedia to help people learn and to navigate and to get better skills and knowledge and really the ability to navigate the system. I see it as a gap, and I'm wondering in this kind of model that you're talking about and kind of a simple, straightforward, grounded approach founded in purpose and kind of roll up from there. Where do things, like you said before, you were saying that there's a lot of different tools and solutions coming at HR folks these
Yeah.
days. And I'm one of those guys who pitch stuff to say I was a consultant for years and tried to help do that and address healthcare costs and productivity, all these things. I do think that health literacy is a big gap, but either specific to health literacy and or kind of the tools that HR folks are being hit up with, what's your kind of thoughts and approaches to some of this?
Before we started recording, we talked about this, pretty directly around how there's a constellation of vendors that are trying to bring offerings to the employer market with the idea that you will better engage your workers, that there will be some form of productivity improvement, that there will be some form of performance or retention improvement. And opportunity there is to get really clear about impact. Far too many of these ideas have some big logic leaps in them, which, if you're not able to identify the impact in a clear, grounded, intellectually honest way, then these types of offerings become nice to dos, become advocacy based. And especially if you're a for profit organization, even if you're not, if you're a mission driven, not for profit, hopefully you're still there to try to accomplish your purpose. And most organizations' purpose, unless you're a healthcare provider to your employees, is something different than providing health, mental, financial wellness. So, I guess to put a bow on that, I'd say it would be massively beneficial for the providers in this type of employer market to get crystal clear and as succinct and direct as possible about the impact. Don't leave it up to the employers to decide that they want to invest out of the goodness of their hearts. As we've seen the capital market environment tighten and a much stronger focus on profitability and minimizing burn, the war for talent is changing. Just continuing to throw programs and policies, bread and circuses at the masses to try to, add to your head count. I don't think that's the playbook right now. You and I have seen a couple of different cycles in the market, and the playbook now is do what matters, do what you know will support the mission of your organization. And so that brings it back to the impact. Be selective, be focused, and go deep on those few offerings that can contribute in a meaningful way.
I think that makes a lot of sense. It's so interesting how many, I'll just call them vendors out there, programs out there are not very clear about what that impact or outcome is and those metrics. And to the degree that they'll be measured, you're already in a contract. How do you pull them out? The distance between the intervention and, for example, impact on healthcare costs is a long distance and a noisy channel along the way. So hard to truly prove that. The other thing that I often think about is a value equation is that it's engagement times solution equals value. So you can have a solution that's 100%, but zero engagement times 100 is zero.
Yeah.
So to your point, you have to have just a few things that you want people to really engage in that you think have that impact you're looking for.
Yeah.
So makes a lot of sense to me. And I personally, I think health literacy could be one of those few things, but everybody kind of sort through on their journeys.
Yeah, there's a simple model I talk about in the book, and a lot of credit to my co-author, Dr. Brad Harris, who's now at HEC Paris. Whatever your culture is, whatever type of culture or the way that you want to get things done, it's probably useful to have a simple sort of 3-column exercise as you consider your policies and programs. So, what's an ante? Think about poker terms. What's table stakes? What do
Right.
you need to bring to be able to attract and retain workers? Probably some form of health insurance for full time workers, probably competitive base pay, probably those clear basics.
Right.
What are the things that are against the core culture that you're trying to identify? Boy, there was one example out here in the Valley where there was a maternity leave technology vendor that was helping companies to support their workers through leaves of absence. And they had a scandal where they fired all of their workers that went out on maternity leave. What would be against the culture that you're trying to create? And then align. What are the things that will differentiate you in a meaningful way? So if you are a financial services organization, boy, wouldn't it make sense to offer some form of financial wellness product or support for your workers? If you're a housing provider, wouldn't it make sense to offer some form of housing, something, education, grants, whatever it is? So think about those things that are strongly aligned and differentiated with your mission, your purpose, the culture that you're trying to create. So anti, against, and aligned. And boy, that can help you make some what could be complicated decisions very simple.
I really like it, and it makes me think of I'm here in the Bay Area as well, and some of my tech friends we know have thrown everything from laundry service to take-home food, and now they're regrouping, to your
Yeah.
point, and probably need to take a look at what's really gonna differentiate us, what's anti, what's aligned. It makes a lot of sense to really think about kind of those differentiators. We've certainly seen people, throwing everything that they can.
More is not better.
Yeah.
More is just more noise.
I want to keep going on this for a second. So, one of the hot topics, of course, is health equity, inclusion, diversity. When I say topics, I don't mean to devalue it all. It's something on everyone's mind. Social determinants that it turns out just because you have a paycheck and benefits doesn't mean that you're immune to maybe not having transportation or stable housing or whatever. Where does that fit as a leader? Are you responsible or where do you draw the line to help people help us put some context around, you know, investing in the community, all the things that are starting to happen out there?
Yeah. There's a fine line or maybe a decision to make around where advocacy for social, environmental, political causes resides. And I'd suggest, again, whether you're public, private, for profit, not for profit, that you start with what's our mission? What's our purpose? What are we trying to accomplish? And then you align the programs, policies, donations, volunteer activities with those things. I was at Wells Fargo many years ago, giant employer nationally, but particularly here in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I was the co president of the Wells Fargo Volunteers Group. And we had millions of dollars that we would be able to donate. And we would organize all sorts of volunteer things for the community. And we had to make some choices. So we'd have all sorts of different groups and employees suggesting that we donate or volunteer into different types of activities. And we used as our guiding principle what is most closely connected to our business. Do we want to support breast cancer research and the Leukemia Lymphoma Society? Absolutely. But if we have to make a choice between financial wellness and housing, Wells Fargo is a huge mortgage lender. Will we pick the health and disease topics or will we pick those things that are closer to our business? And the answer was pretty clear. And so I think that organizations can use a pretty simple rubric to figure out what's closest to the core. And those organizations that might be more health centric, maybe they put more of their time and resources and administrative support into things that are closer to their organization. And so I think that that can be a trap for individuals and leaders is they may feel strongly as an individual about this is the right thing to do or these are my values. And I'd suggest that individuals should make decisions to be part of organizations that mirror their personal values. And of course, there may be advocacy inside an org to make that org more like what you personally believe, but there's a matching, I think, that's natural. And things start to feel awkward on both sides where there's a mismatch between an employee, even the senior leader may have some desires and some advocacy that may be out of step with what their organization exists to do.
Yeah, it makes sense. So funny you brought up Wells because I was thinking of them too. I've worked with them for years and been part of some of the events and have a sweatshirt with the logo and
Yeah. Yeah.
everything. Well, hey, I don't want to keep you too long. This has been fascinating and I've learned a lot. I really appreciate the conversation. As before we part, you've kind of already given us a bunch of great tips, but give us a couple more takeaways for leaders. We've got, HR types out there in the audience with any luck at all and benefits types and trying to deal with, like you say, this kind of chaotic environment. And at the end of the day, we're trying to run a business.
Yeah.
So help us with a couple parting thoughts.
Yeah, I'll try to take my own advice here and be focused and reinforce a few of the things that I've said. So that is clarity is kindness. Have focus around the mission, purpose, vision of your organization, and all the decisions flow so much more smoothly down from that. What are our goals? What are our priorities? Who do we hire? What types of roles do we need? What programs do we offer? So, like, really start with clarity around what we're trying to accomplish. And that has to start at the top of your organization. You can't crowdsource it. I have a really simple diagram and guide that I offer. Actually, once we break, maybe we could do this in the show notes. I have a promotion code for a free download from my
Absolutely.
website.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll be able to do that for sure.
Yeah. And so you can download this guide, and it's basically called waterfall planning. What are you trying to accomplish? And then what are all the things that ladder down from that? And I've built it with HR professionals in mind, but frankly, it works for anybody. So again, clarity's kindness, get clear and focused, and everything else just makes a lot more sense.
Great advice. Really appreciate it. So again, thank you for your time, Andrew. And we will definitely be posting some of the information about this download and your book and some of your background. And thanks again for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.